we know each other very well. He has been writing to me quite often, and whenever he comes to Chennai, he would meet me and all that one. So when I met him last time, he almost lost his eyesight. So I took his hand and then said, Paneerselvam, I am Paneerselvam. He was asking me what is what and all that one. Then he was asking me this question, what are you reading now? So I was proud, very proud. I said, I am working on Gadamer, Paul Ricoeur, Habermas, because I have a fascination towards these people. Quite natural. That too, after meeting Habermas in 2000 at Germany, I thought he's the only philosopher available in the world. So I was proud to say that I work on these people. Then Daya said one thing, read these thinkers, very much essential, but don't be carried away by these thinkers. That is a very, very significant point. Why? Because it is very much essential for us to read or learn the Western thinkers or Western philosophical discourse or what is happening in the West. But at the same time, we have to see how far they are accommodative in Indian context or how far they are meaningful to us. It is not necessary for us to simply hate the West. So it is very much essential to analyze, but it doesn't mean that in Indian philosophical tradition everything is perfect and simply we have to accept. So wherever necessary and whenever necessary, we have to make certain changes in the tradition of India. That is the reason why I am always fascinated by the theme hermeneutics. So let me go to the chapter, lecture, Eco-Hermeneutics, moving towards green philosophy. Now there are four important terms in philosophy which had happened in 20th century or 21st century. The first turn is a linguistic turn, all of us know that. And Wittgenstein is mainly responsible for this turn, the linguistic turn. Okay. The second turn is the hermeneutic turn. And here we can place thinkers like Heidegger, Gadamer, Paul Ricoeur, and others. And the third important turn is the ecological turn, where I would like to locate myself in order to discuss this topic. The third one is ecological turn, and the fourth one is the postmodern turn. So these are the four important turns which has, I would say, shaken the entire Western world with regard to philosophical discourse. And it is interesting to note that all these four turns are interrelated. Whether it is a linguistic turn or hermeneutic turn or ecological turn or postmodern turn, they are synthesized, they are closely connected. For example, if we take the last two, ecological and the postmodern turn, you can see there are certain resemblances between these two. Ecology cannot be understood without the postmodern understanding, and vice versa. Similarly, when we are talking about the hermeneutic turn, there is an implication which is involved. That is, in order to understand the hermeneutic turn, you should know the significance of the ecological or postmodern turn. So these turns are very important. Now let us restrict ourselves to the ecological turn, which is quite often discussed at length in postmodern world. Now let us ask this question, first question. What is ecological turn? What do we mean by this ecological turn? Of course, for the past 4 days, you have been listening to great professors, and some of these points which I am discussing with you now might have been already said by these great professors. But let me try to analyze this problem from my own perspective. I don't know whether my perspective is right or wrong, because I never look into that. This is my perspective, I am presenting it to you. But if there is something which is not acceptable to you, you have every right to criticize me. So, what is the ecological turn? Now, the ecological turn is not a single or univocal issue, which means it cannot be separated from other issues which has a concern for human society. So one can say it is not a single issue. On the contrary, it stretches all the way from the issues of pollution of our rivers, for example, to the question of the relationship between human beings, world and God. So this definition given by a postmodern thinker clearly shows that it cannot be an issue. It is an issue just will start with the pollution of river, and then it has a close connection with the world, human being and God. When God is included, this is very important. So this is how one can understand the ecological turn. So how do we define ecology? Ecology can be defined as an interrelationship that exists between the organism and the environment. Now, when I say organism, it includes both the living and non-living. This is a very, very important point which we have to take into account, because human being who is anthropocentric in nature quite often considers that the non-living cannot be the part of the society. So, if you analyze the meaning of ecology, you would understand the term organism includes both the living as well as non-living. I give some examples. So, the relation, that the interrelation that exists between the organism on the one side and the environment on the other is otherwise known as ecology. In fact, the term ecology was first used by a German zoologist by name Ernest Haeckel in the year 1866 in order to show how the animals, the organic and inorganic, are closely connected with the human society. So this is a background in which ecology has emerged. I said that my approach is hermeneutic approach. What does this mean? Now, what I'm trying to say is every discipline or every ideology or every system of morality or every form of religion has to rethink. The word rethink is very important. They have to rethink their fundamental principles in the context of ecology. So what does this mean? This means that there is a necessity for us to rethink some of the philosophical concepts or religious concepts which are discussed at length. So this term rethinking is very important. Of course, all the time we are thinking, but in hermeneutics we are concerned about rethinking or reinterpreting or revisiting or re-understanding, because as you know, the term hermeneutics is used in a very broader context in postmodern tradition. Because as you know, hermeneutics is nothing but interpretation. Quite often it is said it is interpretation of the text. But now in ecological context, we try to see that how this interpretation or rethinking of the social norms or values could be seen in their broader perspective. So this is how ecology has a close link with the postmodern understanding. So in hermeneutical understanding, we see the need for rethinking some of our philosophical concepts. So this means there is a necessity for us to reinterpret the notion of understanding itself. Am I clear? If you have any doubt, please stop me then and there. What I'm trying to say is that there is a need for us to reinterpret the notion of understanding itself. Now, when do we say that we understand a person, for example? If Lakshmipati is saying something, if I am able to understand him, if I am following correctly, then I would say, yes, I follow you. So, understanding here means the relation that exists between one and the other. This is how we understand the notion of understanding. But if you look at the way in which postmodernists understand the notion of understanding, then their interpretation would be different. For example, Habermas, he talks about the notion of understanding. How do we understand the other? This is a question which is raised by him. How do we understand? Do I understand you? That is a question raised by Habermas. And you would say that understanding is possible provided there is a symmetrical relation between the one and the other. A symmetrical relation means both the speaker, right, and the hearer or the listener, they have to participate in the same level. Then only understanding is possible according to Habermas. So this is what he calls the ideal speech situation. So when we understand the other, then there should be a symmetrical relation. How the symmetrical relation is possible? When there is a dialogue. So this is a prior condition which is playing a very important role in postmodern understanding. Now, some of the postmodern thinkers developed this concept of understanding, in quotes, by saying that there is a need for us to reinterpret the notion of understanding. Am I clear? Normally, when we say understand the other, I mean that I follow you. I am able to understand what you say. That is the normal way of understanding. But in hermeneutical understanding, I said there is a need for re-understanding the notion of understanding itself. This means that we have to revisit the notion of understanding. So that now what is this revisiting the notion of understanding? In this revisiting the notion of understanding, we have to change our concept or we have to reinterpret our concept so that a new meaning would emerge. Now let me quote one example. For example, you can take the discipline or subject aesthetics. Now normally how do we define it? We say that the way of looking at something or the way of seeing beauty, a beautiful mountain for example. It gives some aesthetic sense. When I see a good movie, for example, some of you are from Bengal, so I would like to quote my favorite film director, Satyadeep Ray, Pather Panjali. So it gives the aesthetic sense. So this is how we understand aesthetics. But in philosophical approach, especially in the postmodern approach, the term aesthetics has a different connotation altogether. This means we try to say that we have to revisit the concept or the subject aesthetics by reinventing some meaning which is already visible in it, which is not seen by our ordinary way of looking. Now I'll give one example. Some of you might have read this in Philosophical Investigation of Wittgenstein. In the philosophical investigation, Wittgenstein talks about two kinds of seeing. Two kinds of seeing. In order to explain this, he gives the example of Jastrow's duck rabbit example. No? In one, if you look at that picture, I don't know whether you have seen that picture. It would look like a rabbit. At the same time, it would also look like a rabbit. Now, by giving this Jastrow's picture, Wittgenstein argued there are two ways of seeing. One is seeing, in quotes, seeing, and another is seeing as. The seeing as is something new that is coming from that picture. This Wittgenstein calls dawn of aspect. Something new is emerging. For example, I see the picture and say, oh, here is a duck. Then somebody corrects me and says, no, you see, look at closely, you see a rabbit. Right? So when somebody tells me that there is a rabbit, then that is something new which is emerging to me. Or this is nothing but the dawn of aspects, according to Wittgenstein. So this could be applied to aesthetics, which has to be revisited in the context of ecology. Okay. Now, how do we do that? In order to do that, we should know the relation that exists between man and nature. Because in man-nature relation, the ecoistics, the ordinary type or the aesthetics which we have been talking about from the time of Plato onwards, I would call it as general aesthetics. But with regard to postmodern understanding, I would use the word ecoistics. Okay, that is the distinction. So this ecoistics takes into account the entire world. Nothing is left out. Whatever is available in the biosphere is included in this context. So this ecoistic is a new way of looking at ecology. Something new is emerging. That is the contention made by the hermeneuticians as well as the postmodernists. So how is it possible? This is possible provided there is a need to change our perspective towards nature. This is very important. We have to change our perspective towards nature or our attitude towards nature. So, in other words, one can say there is a shift in our mode of thinking. There is a shift in the mode of our thinking. Because all these years, we have been thinking in one particular way, right? But now the postmodernists as well as the hermeneuticians give a new methodology of looking the world as well as nature. So this I would call as the live world. The live world, I will explain that in a few minutes. But to start with, the live world is nothing but the participatory role of the human beings. So I am not going to elaborate this term live world because I am preserving this term for some other purpose. So the general understanding of live world is that it speaks about the participatory role. The participatory role here means how, as a human being, I participate in the nature. What is my role in preserving the nature? So I am not there simply to exhaust all the natural resources that are available. Right? So as a participant of the nature, I have to preserve it because all of us know the fact that there is only one world or one earth which has to be preserved for the future human being. So the participatory role of human beings has been stressed by the eco philosophers. And here we come across different approaches towards nature. I would like to quote three important papers which has emerged in the postmodern tradition. So there are three different approaches to nature. Here, three papers I am just mentioning. The first paper is, I just very briefly I am going to talk about that. The first paper has a title, Contemporary Aesthetics and the Neglect of Natural Beauty. It's a very important article written by R. Hepburn. He talks about how human beings have completely neglected the significance of ecology. So the natural beauty is quite often neglected by human beings. That is the view of Hepburn. And the second article which I would like to quote here is by Arnold Berland, who talks about aesthetics engagement. That is how we engage ourselves with nature. This is what is stressed in this paper. Then third is another important paper by Alan Carlson. Some of you who are, I heard that some of you have already worked on this environmental ethics. So Alan Carlson talks about his argument against environmental formalism is something very important. And he says how there is a aesthetic value of an object which is entirely determined by the non-formal equalities. This point, these three articles are very much important in understanding the postmodern approach.
Sir, will you repeat the last one?
No. The third article is Alan Carlson, Allen, Carlson, Carlson. And he is against this environmental formalism, okay, and he talks about the significance of aesthetic value of the object, which is entirely determined by its non-formal equalities. So these three are very important papers which made a very significant contribution in the postmodern tradition. Now, when I say the participatory role of the human beings, the postmodernists would say that we have the obligation towards nature. Now, what is the obligation? That there should be public awareness and we have to take action on environmental issues. These are the two important aspects which we have to take into account. So we have to protect nature like that of artwork. Now I was talking about general aesthetics, and also remember I said there is another way of interpreting aesthetics, that is eco-aesthetics. Now in aesthetics normally we protect the artwork, right? Saying that it is something which has to be preserved. Now in the context of eco-aesthetics, we would say that it is very much essential for us to protect nature as we protect an artwork. So here you can see the distinction between a general aesthetics and the eco aesthetics. So what does this mean? This means that human beings have obligation towards nature. So this obligation is something, this notion of obligation is something which has been stressed by the hermeneutic as well as the postmodern thinkers. So when we say we have the obligation towards nature, we must know the fact that it is anthropocentric in nature. This might surprise some of you because why I am using the word anthropocentric? Because now I am against this anthropocentric ethic. Because in anthropocentric ethics, we know man is the nucleus. Man thinks everything exists for his own sake. Okay, I am not proposing that theory. In fact, I am rejecting that theory. In fact, my ethics is something different. I would call it as transpersonal ethics, which I will discuss later. Transpersonal ethics. But now I am saying that our obligation towards nature, that is our obligation to protect nature, has to be anthropocentric. What does this mean? Am I contradicting my own statement? No. Why? Because when I say that we have to protect nature and it is anthropocentric, it means that it is ultimately the human beings who can protect nature. So it is anthropocentric. So it must start from the human being. So in that way, one can say it is anthropocentric. That's all. There are two ways of understanding the notion anthropocentric, and I hope you would understand the context in which I am using the term anthropocentric. When we say that we have an obligation to protect nature, and when I say it is anthropocentric, it has got a different connotation, which means that we have to start the work with them, or it starts with human beings, or human beings alone can protect the nature, because he is the one who destroys nature. So he has to take care of nature. So what we need is, what we have to realize otherwise is that every living and non-living being have a dignity. We have to respect their life, whether it is living or non-living, right? We have the responsibility. So this dignity and responsibility always go together. Because so every individual or every creature or non-creature has an intrinsic dignity and inalienable rights which have to be preserved by the human beings. So human beings, as a custodian of nature, has an inescapable responsibility. He cannot escape. So that's why I am using the word inescapable responsibility for what he does. So there is dignity on the one side, which means every living being or every creature, living or non-living, they have dignity, and that dignity can be preserved only by human beings. Right? Now, where do we start? The responsibility, when I talk about responsibility, we must remember the fact that the responsibility starts with the individuals. Because all these years, all these centuries, perhaps one can say, we have been talking about that. Lots and lots of books were written. Lots and lots of speeches were given. But still we are having this problem. So this means theoretical discussions will not help us. No more theory. We have to stop writing this theory or framing some new theories one after the other. So it is high time for us to apply the so-called theories which we have learned from the past and apply to the context and see how far they are accepted. So this means the responsibility starts with the individual. And it is very much essential for us to talk about the role of bioethics and biosafety. Here I would like to say something about bioethics. Some of you, I think, are familiar with this term bioethics, wherein we include everything. Professor Derald Meiser, I don't know whether you are aware of this name. Derald Meiser is a well-known ecology professor who teaches. He's a vice president of the American Sovereign University, and he has been proposing this theory of bioethics, wherein he talks about how man has to protect the nature. So bioethics has got diversified. Unfortunately, in India, I don't know whether some universities offer this course. As far as I know, bioethics is not taught in Indian universities. whereas in Bangladesh and other universities, this subject is very popular, and in fact, many of the foreign countries they teach bioethics as a very important subject. So, why? Because bioethics includes everything. It is a part of human life. It talks about biosafety, genetic engineering, surrogate mother, all different fields of research are included under bioethics. So bioethics has a very, it is an umbrella term which can include different spheres of life, we can say. And this methodology is very much essential in order to understand the ecological imbalance. Because we should understand the factor that if one individual commits a blunder in harming the nature, then it would add momentum, and as a result of that, the entire nature would be spoiled. So that is the reason why we say the responsibility of the individual, of one individual, is very important. So we have to start with the individuals. So let us see how one can proceed further. Now, when we are talking about ecology, we have to understand the fact that there is always ecological decline, and many professors and many scientists have emphasized this fact. One thinker whom I would like to quote here is Dr. R.K. Pachauri. He was the former chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. He says that the ecological decline is ever growing crisis, and it is because of the human beings the nature has destroyed, or nature the role of nature is minimized, he says. So he says, further says that it has affected both living as well as non-living. And he gives various examples like how the release of carbon dioxide from fossil fuels affects the entire globe and all that. One, he talks about the global warming, etc. I skip some of this, and then I'll come to the very significant point, which I think is very much essential. That is, what we need is ecological awareness. Now, how do we gain this ecological awareness? Ecological awareness is nothing but the contemporary sensibility towards nature. The contemporary sensibility is something which one has to keep in mind in order to serve the earth, in order to save the earth. We can also say we can save the earth. And it is here some of our philosophers have developed a concept like biophilia. Are you familiar with this concept, biophilia? Biophilia is a concept which is very much popular in bioethics, wherein it is said that biophilia is the emotional affiliation of human beings to other living beings, which has been very much emphasized in ecology. And the respect of life has been emphasized by many great thinkers like Leopold. And Leopold's definition on land ethics is very important. I give his quotation. Some of you, I think, are already aware of this. He says, I quote, "A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise," unquote. So Leopold is one important thinker who has given a new direction for the ecological understanding. And another important thinker is Arnias, who has given a beautiful analysis of ecology, and he has developed, I hope you are aware of that, the deep ecology, and he makes a distinction between shallow ecology and the deep ecology, and argues how the deep ecology can serve the human society, whereas the shallow ecology has a close relation with human beings, and it always implies the fact that how human beings can exploit nature. But in a deep ecology, there is a segment which involves the human beings to perform the role of a trustee, which has been emphasized by Mahatma Gandhi and others. So man's role in this world is minimized, I would say, by the ecologists. They say that you are there to protect nature, you are there not to spoil nature. So these are some of the important concepts which are discussed by the ecologists. And of course, Arnia's deep ecology has some new insights, I would say, because he has developed the ecosophy T, which is explained in this way. I quote him: I call my philosophy ecosophy T, using the character T just to emphasize that other people in the moment would, if motivated to formulate their worldview and general value priorities, arrive at different ecosophies. So ecosophy A, B, T, Z. So, and finally he says, by ecosophy, I mean a philosophy inspired by a deep ecological movement. So this is a very significant point. In fact, many of it is also argued by many of our Indian thinkers that Arnia's views are not something new in Indian context. They say in India, in Indian philosophical tradition, especially in ancient philosophical tradition, we have got a conception like this, similar to this. So deep ecology, according to some of our contemporary thinkers, is not alien to us. It is very much available in the ancient Vedic as well as the Upanishad tradition. So this, but we have to admit the fact that deep ecology and the distinction between deep ecology and shallow ecology is very essential in order to know that it is only the deep ecology which can save the humanity. So it is right in one way to see our ancient tradition through the scope which we have received from deep ecology. So what we have to remember here is that, or we have to ask this question, whether we have developed protection centers or protection center. Protection center or protection center. What does this mean? See, in the context of ecological stabilization, it is very much essential for us to see how we have been using forest. Because if we think that forest exists for our purpose, to cut down trees, etc., then we are treating forest as protection center. But now we have the awareness, we understood the fact that they are not protection centers, but protection centers, because they are, all of us know that only forests can protect the human society. Now, in this context, I would like to see how one important thinker of the contemporary period, I hope some of you are aware of this name, Roger Scruton. Are you aware of this name? Roger, R-O-G-E-R, Roger Scruton, S-C-R-U-E-R-U-T-O-N, Scruton. He has written one important book called Green Philosophy. I think this was published in 2012. In this book, he has raised a very important issue, namely how to think seriously about the planet. That is why he has titled this book as a Green Philosophy. Here he asks this question, are we really protecting the environment? This is the first question he raises. And he says that it is necessary for us to preserve human nature so that we can develop a green philosophy. We have been talking about Western philosophy, Indian philosophy, Chinese philosophy, but here is Roger, who talks about developing what is known as a green philosophy. And also he has used one very interesting term, some of you hope know this term, Okophilia. You know this term? Have you heard of this name? Term? I'll give the spelling. Oikophilia. Okophilia. Philia, Oikophilia. Right? Now, what is the meaning? I was puzzled when I read this word. He explains this word by saying that it is nothing but the love and affection towards the environment. And he says that it is possible for us to protect nature provided we have our love towards nature. We have to understand the fact that we are here not to use but respect. And similarly, not to exploit nature. But here also one can say that this is not something new because once again in ancient philosophical tradition, this aspect is very much. In Western tradition, there is always a distinction between I and you. Martin Buber, some of you, he makes the other distinction, namely life world, wherein it is said the life world, you can make certain amendments or changes. You can modify it. You can remodify it. You can reinterpret so that it can have more meaningful to us. So this means when we change our attitude towards nature, then it becomes how we are using the life word. So the life word of Husserl very clearly shows that there is a need for us to move from the structure, that is the system, to life world wherein we can accommodate everything. Hope you follow me. Because now this distinction is very much essential, because Husserl would say these are the two aspects of existence. Whenever we talk about human existence, he says these two are predominating. Unfortunately, he says in the system you can't make any change, so he rejects that and he develops a new concept called life world, wherein he said in the life world you can make multiple changes. So this means your attitude towards nature would change in life world. So you can make some amendments or changes so that life can be more meaningful, or you can look at nature from a different perspective, which from the beginning now I have been telling that how we can have a postmodern understanding or hermeneutical understanding, which can approach the problem from a new perspective, which was not seen hitherto, which was perhaps we can say which has been neglected by our thinkers so far. Of course, Indian philosophers are exception. I already said that we have gone beyond the Western mind, but the only thing is there is nobody to exhibit that. There is nobody to tell us that already these aspects are very much prevailing in Indian system. Only by reading Arne Nias, for example, we are able to know the distinction between the deep ecology and shallow ecology. Then we say, oh no, this is very much available in Indian tradition. But this is possible because of the Western mind, I would say. Because by reading postmodern understanding or by reading, looking at the hermeneutical approach, we can see how this, but this does not mean that I am trying to argue that what has been said by this postmodern thinkers was long back anticipated by our ancient thinkers. No. We can say similar thinking is very much available in India. We can't say everything is one and the same and we can glorify ourselves. No, I am not against that. I would like to simply say that some parallel could be drawn between the East and the West from the traditional point of view as well as the modern point. Now, so I made a distinction between a system and life birth, and I also said that it is the life birth which can give a new dimension to nature. Here I would like to quote two important thinkers, one from India and one from West. Because the Western thinker whom I am going to quote is also Indian thinker. His name is Raimundo Panikkar. I don't know whether you are aware of this name. Raimundo Panikkar is actually was born in I think Kerala. I don't know. He is, but I think his mother is Keralite and the father is Spain. I mean, person from Spain. So Raimundo Panikkar, he has developed a very beautiful concept called the cosmotheandric vision. Cosmotheandric. There are three terms that are cosmo, theocentric. Cosmotheandric, theocentric. Now, this cosmotheandric view, not cosmocentric, cosmotheandric. Three terms are involved. Raimundo Panikkar, a great thinker who was very much influenced by Indian philosophy, and he wrote his famous book, The Vedic Experience, which is very fascinating. So, what is the significance of this book, or what is the significance of this idea? This cosmotheandric vision, three things are included, three concepts are included. The world is there, God is there, and man. Three concepts constitute cosmotheandric. So he says that God needs, a very important point, God needs the world as well as the human beings. Right? This is a very significant point. And he says the nature constitutes all the three. The world without God and human beings is incomplete, and vice versa. So this is a very beautiful concept, and he was, as I said just now, he was very much influenced by Indian approach. And then another very significant approach, which is very much available in Indian tradition, is the Vishishtadvaita concept of the world as well as God. You know, Vishishtadvaita is a very important Vedantic school of thought propounded by Ramanuja. Right? They talk about three eternal realities. One is Chit, Achit, and Ishvara. Ishvara here, Vishnu. Chit, Achit, and Ishvara. Now, it is very significant to note that according to Ramanuja, Achit is also one of the eternal realities. Right? What is Achit? Inert, unconscious, right? That also is one of the eternal realities. But of course, if you would further say that Chit and Achit cannot function without the support of Ishvara, that is a different point altogether. What I am trying to say is, like cosmotheandric vision of Raimundo Panikkar, we can also see the role of Chit, Achit, and Ishvara. So there are many parallels which we can learn from our ancient tradition. Though we celebrate Raimundo Panikkar for developing such a beautiful concept, this is very much visible in Indian tradition. And similarly, Heidegger's very interesting essay on the origin of the work of art. This is a very important work of Heidegger, wherein he talks he talks about the significance of art with that of being. Art is connected to being, be capital. So here you can see the significance of God, because being sometimes we identify with Brahman or God or some center. So in this work of Heidegger, you can see the interrelation that exists between the being on the one side and art on the other. So it is nothing but the connecting the mundane with the non-mundane, or the empirical with the transcendent. When I say it is artwork, it is empirical. When I talk about the being or some concept like God or Brahman, then it becomes a transcendent. So both transcendent and immanent are connected. So this is how you can see the significance of the world, the significance of human beings, and the significance of God. In short, we say that even God cannot function without the support or without the help of the human being. Now, it is very much essential for me to talk about some of the important contribution made by thinkers like Albert Schweitzer, for example. Albert Schweitzer is one thinker who talked about the significance of the. And of course, there are thinkers like Immanuel Kant, Max Weber, Hans Jonas, Habermas, Richard Hare, John Rawls. These are some thinkers, some of the thinkers who have talked about the need for understanding or reinterpreting the relation that exists between human beings and God. Now, one quote of Max Weber I would like to quote. Max Weber developed a concept called the responsibility ethics. And he says that when we are constructing or reconstructing concepts, it is very much essential that how these concepts have a close link with the responsibility of the individual. That's why he has developed what is known as the responsibility ethics, Max Weber. Then the responsibility ethics concept is something very important because one more thinker whom I would like to quote here is Hans Jonas. His book is very important. The imperative of responsibility in search of an ethics in the technological age. This is a very lengthy title. I would like to quote here. The imperative responsibility in search of an ethics for the technological age. This was a book of Hans Jonas, and here he talks about this is a responsibility ethics once again. The significance of this book is, why I am quoting this book is, that he denied or rejects the Kantian ethics. And he's saying very boldly that Kantian ethics has a particular point, or he says at a particular point it stops. What is that? It talks about the anthropocentric ethics. It is mainly focusing on human beings or the welfare of human beings, whatever it may be, but is anthropocentric in nature. So, yeah, no, the response Kantian ethics. So now Hans Jonas replaces Kantian ethics by the responsibility ethics. Now I would like to quote Jonas. He has given a new categorical imperative. I quote two sentences from his text. I quote, act in such a way, you can see Kantian phrases, act in such a way that the consequences of your actions are compatible, then he changes, with a future human existence on earth, without endangering the conditions of mankind's survival for an unlimited duration of time. So here you can see that the Kantian imperative is something which is replaced by a new categorical imperative. So he says that this is a responsibility ethics. So the responsibility ethics now gives a new dimension. What is the role of human being? How human beings have to treat nature? This has been emphasized by Hans Jonas. Then another important thinker whom I would like to quote very briefly is Habermas. Habermas, it's okay. He has developed discourse ethics. Habermas, I said in the beginning, is a very, very influential thinker because he basically was a sociologist, but he wrote on philosophy, religion, political science, whatnot. He's one of the senior most philosophers living in Germany. He's around 93, I think. He has developed a concept called discourse ethics. The title of the book is Discourse Ethics. Now, this discourse ethics is something very, very important because in this discourse ethics, he talks about how the theory of communication can help us to give a new dimension to nature. This is something very important. I quote two of his sentences, one sentence, sorry. He says, every valid principle or norm should be able to find acceptance of all affected individuals if these could only participate in a practical discourse. This is very important. Because all our discourse, remember my sentences in the beginning, I said discourse, philosophy is a discourse. So now he says that there is a need for a practical discourse. Now, what is this practical discourse? That participation of human beings in re-understanding the nature. So, discourse ethics is a new way of understanding some of the intricacies of nature. So you can see thinkers like Habermas or Hans Jonas or Husserl, they have given a new dimension to nature. One more thinker whom I would like to quote here is Professor R. Sundararajan. Anybody coming from Pune University? No. Sundararajan, have you heard of this name? Yes. A very great philosopher, of course, who is a well-known phenomenologist. Oh, you are yes, that is it. Good. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I have it. I am not very. Okay, thank you so much. Specialty. Good. Very, very nicely prepared tea. Thanks. Chatterjee, madam, thank you. For this, I don't mind giving another lecture. So it will be boring for you. So another important thinker, a postmodern thinker, I would like to call him postmodern thinker, because he has written extensively on postmodernism, phenomenology, and ecological issues. And he talks about how or why there is a need for rethinking or rearranging the relation that exists between nature and history. And he says there are two ways of understanding eco-humanism. In fact, he uses the word earth ethics. And he talks about the two ways in which human beings can be related to nature. This is a very beautiful insight, I would say. Earth ethics, or he says eco-humanism. And he says how the human beings, yes.
Sir, this is the Sundararajan book.
Yeah.
That ethics. But who's the thinker?
Sundararajan, I said. Yes. Sundararajan. Okay. So he, while talking about the interrelation that exists between human being and nature, he makes a distinction between a separative humanism on the one side or one hand, separative humanism, and participatory humanism. So in order to understand, I repeat, in order to understand the relation that exists between human beings and nature, a distinction has to be made. But there is always a distinction. One is separative humanism and the other is participatory humanism. Now, what is the distinction? The separative humanism is autocentric, whereas participatory humanism is what? Can anyone of you guess this? Allocentric. One is autocentric and another is allocentric. In the allocentric approach, there is always an openness. It demands the other. It demands the existence of the other. The other does not mean here human beings alone. Whereas in the separative humanism, the individual exists like an island. He separates himself from that of the other living beings as well as non-living beings, and that is why it is said it is autocentric. When we talk about allocentric, it embraces every individual. It embraces both the living and non-living. This approach of Sundarajan gives a new dimension to the problem of a relation that exists between nature and human being. Then one more point of Sundarajan I would like to quote. This very interesting book is Humanization of Transcendental Philosophy. Humanization of very, very important book. One should read Sundarajan if you are interested in developing the phenomenological attitude. This book is very interesting. Humanization of Transcendental Philosophy. Here he develops a concept called geophilia. Geophilia. Actually, this concept of geophilia he has developed in the year 1995, and he has written one very important article. It must be available in the library here. That is in Indian Philosophical Quarterly, 1995 issue. The title of that article is Philosophy as Geophilia, towards the recovery of the idea of that. This is the title of the article. Philosophy as Geophilia, towards the recovery of the idea of earth is the title of recovery of idea of the earth, published in the Indian Philosophical Quarterly, 1995 issue, wherein he develops the geophilia idea, which later he writes in the form of a book, the title Humanization of Transcendental Philosophy. Now he talks about some important principles. One, that is, in fact, I picked up the term ecological turn from his writings only, because he's the one who has talked about the ecological turn, so the term is from him. Now, he says there are some principles which are very fundamental in geophilia. He says, first of all, throughout history, human species has lived and evolved only on this planet. We don't come across a planet where human beings live other than this human society. That's this earth. So throughout history, it is the human species which lives on this earth. So you have to protect that. And secondly, in the course of this evolution, human species has developed complex and pervasive bonds with environmental sphere. So which means that in the process of evolution, human beings have a close contact with the nature. So this is also a very important point. And third point is, such bonds, the bonds that is human being and nature, have given rise to needs which pervade every aspect of life. And two more points. I'm quoting Sundarajan, we are beginning to realize, he says, we are beginning to realize that such needs for contact and communication with other species, when frustrated, may lead to all sorts of unsuspected deprivation and defects. On the other hand, the fulfillment of such communicational needs is a particularly satisfying and even a healing process. And so there is a therapeutic meaning which is involved in that. Then finally he says, we human beings can plan. This is a suggestion. Human beings can plan a role other than that of a predator. All these indications clearly suggest that there is the ecological respect which we have to celebrate. So I feel that it is Sundarajan who has given the crux of the ecological term, and he has given such a wonderful view which has to be celebrated by philosophers. And of course, Sundarajan, I would like to point out here that Sundarajan was a celebrated philosopher not only in philosophy department. He used to deliver lectures in Pune University and other allied universities, not only in philosophy department, but in literature, in anthropology, in sociology, in geography. So he's a versatile scholar who could throw new light on some of our ancient problems. So I got another, I'll take another 10 minutes. Okay. Okay. Got it. Okay.
I took 10 minutes break because he's seeing that the voice is not in the everybody is saying. So it's all because of Roasted is lost and rigid. Then purely, I mean, the gentleman of Christian, I mean, Catholic. Yesterday, I was discussing how church Einstein is related whether human being is there or not. There is a difference. generating will creating.
Ultimately, human who will take
Yeah.
care of it.
And the point which sir has talked about that in responsibility ethics. According to responsibility ethics, it is conscient which is anthropocentrism.
Yeah.
But responsibility ethics talks about non-anthropocentrism or holistic ethics. But Kant is the Samavites.
Yeah.
It will lost its glory.
Some of the terms. Why care? I think उसका मतलब spelling क्या है? OIPU मतलब क्या?
I read.
Because there is a recording is there. Okay. Wait, I'm gonna count it. Srishti, एक photo किसी का आना है क्या?
सब चले जाओ, हम इधर से ले रहे हैं। क्या ये जितने सारे तस्वीर है ना वो ग्रुप में दो, then don't post it in Facebook. Because people will misuse it. I think आजकल क्या करता है पता
मैं एक ही क्लिक किया। उससे क्या है? विचार कर दो।
क्या यार चलो ये पूजा भी आज दिन छुट्टी के लिए चले गए क्या क्या करना अरे आजा सब बड़े से बोला
Okay. Shall we continue?
Yeah.
Just for 10 minutes, I agree. Now, I would like to talk about how the concept of sustainable development is understood. Now, all of us know that the term sustainable development has two important concepts. The first one goes like this: the concepts of needs, in particular, the essential needs of the world, poor, to which overriding priority should be given. And second concept is limitation in the environmental ability to meet the present and the future needs. I think these two concepts clearly show how the notion of sustainable development has to be understood. Now, while talking about the sustainable development, there are four important dimensions which we have to take into account. The first one is the physical dimension, which includes the medium and the climate. Second is the chemical dimension, third is biological, and fourth one is social. One important concept which I would like to hear, of course, I have written something on the Chico movement and Gandhian concept and all, because quite often it is said that many of the modern findings which we find in environmental ethics is very much present in Gandhian methodology, and of course it is true also. But I'm more concerned about one important concept, otherwise known as the universal ethics. We are talking about universal culture, and quite often it is said the universal culture is misnomer. So it is high time for us to ask this question: is there something called universal ethics? And what do I mean by the term universal ethics? Now, I am using the word universal ethics in order to show that it is different from the individual ethics. The individual ethics, otherwise, is anthropocentric ethics, which I would like to call. Whereas the universal ethics is synthesis of different traditions and different aspects of biological, chemical, social, biological, social, spiritual heritage that we have. So what I mean here is that we have got a very rich tradition which has to preserve on the basis of this universal ethics. So a new direction is very much essential in order to develop otherwise known as intercultural understanding. No individual can claim that he is part of this society alone. He has got a universal framework, which means it is high time for us to have what is otherwise known as intercultural understanding, because there are values which are common to all individuals, whether a person living in India or a person living in Rome, whether I'm just referring to you. The values, human values, are one and the same. So I am more concerned about developing a universal ethics, and this is possible provided we have a proper understanding of the ecological system. So we must understand the fact that there is a relation between past, present with that of the future. In fact, the postmodern thinker like Gadamer would say the past, present, and future are always interrelated, and you cannot separate one from the other. Of course, you live in the present based on what had happened in the past, and by having the present life based on the past life, you are trying to shape the future. So, ecological understanding is something like that. Based on your past experiences, right, you are trying to develop a society for the future. In fact, sustainability, the term sustainability has these principles. Each word has got a meaning. For example, S stands for safety, U stands for universally accepted values, S stands for stable, T stands for technology which will be beneficial to all. This is very important. A for anti-pollution, I for improvement in quality of life, N for non-toxic, A for awareness, B for beautiful way of understanding life, I for indigenous knowledge, L for least cost protection, I for income, T for total value, and Y for involvement of the youth. And what I am more concerned about is developing what is known as the environmental auditing. Because we always talk about auditing our accounts. But is there something called environmental auditing? Now, what do I mean by environmental auditing? Environmental auditing means assessing the impact of an existential and industrial or commercial operations on the environment. In fact, how the companies, the so-called multinational companies or industrial and this thing, how they have spoiled the environment. This is high time for us to make environmental auditing, and based on that, we can develop our human society. So this is possible provided we know how human beings, that is human beings, nature and tradition is related. Tradition is something which we have to understood and which we have to give importance. Because that is the reason why in India we always stress the significance and the role of our own tradition. Because you can't separate yourself from that of a tradition. Each and every one of us belong to a particular tradition. So the tradition helps us to carry our values, which we have inherited from the past, and we move forward through the tradition. So the traditional values cannot be forgotten or cannot be rejected. For example, in the past, we know how our ancestors, even the kings, protected the environment. The avataras, for example, refer to different animals. So all this, especially Indian way of life, I am not elaborating. Indian way of life has given a unique or a special place for. So I would like to develop what is otherwise known as a transpersonal ethics, which is nothing but the universal ethics. All the ethics which are practicing now is personal ethics or individual ethics, but now we are transcending the personal ethics. So the transpersonal ethics is possible provided we understand that the entire human society is one and everything exists for the future. So this is possible provided we understand that there is a global cooperation among the people of the world. And I would like to conclude with these points. One is, first point is this, that is, it is very much essential for us to have harmony with nature. A society which is separated from nature cannot prosper. And Indian model, I would say, is the best model that is available for the entire cosmos. So harmony with nature is very much essential. While coming to this place, the car, some of my colleagues and participants, they were talking about how little I could understand about the tribal society, right? Now, I have some close contact with the tribal society in Tamil Nadu, in Giri areas. And these people told me that we don't want any improvement or any, advance or whatever you give for us. You leave alone. If you don't disturb us, because we have a life in which there is a harmony with nature. So quite often you people come in the name of election or